They ruled the galaxy, a nightmare in the darkness. The galactic predators, a species so ruthless and efficient, no civilization that crossed their path had ever survived. They didn't just conquer, they consumed. Entire worlds, once thriving with life, now lay silent, swallowed by the vast reach of their hunger. No one knew where they came from, only that once they appeared, there was no escape. Their name alone sent species fleeing from the outer rim to the core systems. Fear was their true weapon, sharper than any claw, faster than any ship. They were apex predators in every sense. Unlike the races that depended on alliances or technology, the predators thrived on raw power and savagery. Physically superior, their bodies were a deadly fusion of strength, speed, and brutal endurance. Their ships, while not the most advanced, were terrifying in their simplicity, designed for one purpose: to hunt. In battle, they did not waste time with negotiation or tactics. They overwhelmed, suffocated, and dismantled their enemies with sheer force. And after every victory, they left nothing behind but ruins and the chilling memory of their presence. The galaxy had been theirs for millennia. They saw themselves as the natural rulers of the cosmos, the ultimate species that all others existed to feed. Wars had come and gone, but no matter how hard civilizations fought, their struggles were ultimately futile. The predators adapted, learned, and annihilated without a second thought. It wasn't just their physicality that made them terrifying, it was their unshakable confidence in their superiority. They didn't need strategy because, until now, no one had ever forced them to consider the possibility of defeat. To the predators, all other life was either prey or irrelevant. Some species mounted resistance, but it was always short-lived. Their arrogance had grown with each victory, each planet wiped clean of life. Every species encountered so far had fallen into the same category: weak, predictable, and beneath them. The idea that anything could challenge them was laughable. Their mindset was absolute, they were invincible. They had crushed civilizations older and more advanced than themselves. It didn't matter if their prey possessed superior technology or tactical acumen, nothing stood against their brute strength and relentless determination. So, when word of a new species, humans, began to filter through their networks, they barely paid attention. Humans were from a remote planet on the edge of the galaxy, a world they referred to as Earth, classified by other species as a death world. But even that didn't raise alarm. A death world? The predators had conquered harsher environments. A small, fragile race eking out survival on some backwater planet was hardly worth their time. In fact, the thought of humans elicited little more than a chuckle. Another insignificant species, one more planet to add to their ever-growing list of conquests. The arrogance ran deep. The predators had already won the battle in their minds. They assumed humans would crumble just like the countless others who came before them. The thought that these creatures from a backwater planet could be anything other than prey was beyond consideration. The very idea seemed absurd. And yet, what they did not know was that humanity was different. From the predator's lofty perspective, humans appeared small, weak, and fragile, but they had not yet encountered the stubbornness, the ingenuity, the relentless drive to survive that defined this race from Earth. The galactic predators, in all their arrogance, had no idea what was coming for them. The predators first came across humans during what they assumed would be a routine invasion. Another planet, another conquest. Their scouts had detected small, unremarkable ships entering a contested system. To the predators, it was nothing more than a minor annoyance, a handful of primitive vessels from a backwater world. The decision to engage was made without hesitation. After all, it was just humans. A species that lived on a death world, sure, but nothing they hadn't seen before. They sent in a small detachment, confident that it wouldn't take much to swat these pests out of the sky. The human ships, while clearly not as advanced, didn't turn and flee as expected. Instead, they held their position, almost as if they were waiting. The predators moved in for the kill, sure that this would be over in minutes. As they approached, however, the human vessels didn't engage in the typical desperate defense. Instead, they maneuvered with precision, using asteroids and debris for cover. What should have been an easy strike turned into a frustrating game of chase, the humans dodging their attacks with surprising skill. When the predators finally managed to force a direct engagement, they expected the humans to crumble. They'd seen it happen before, lesser species breaking under pressure, overwhelmed by sheer force. But instead of panicking, the humans responded with a calculated calm. Their small ships launched a series of coordinated strikes, hitting weak points in the predators' formation. They didn't have superior firepower, but they didn't need it. The humans used hit-and-run tactics, exploiting the predators' overconfidence and heavy-handed approach. Every time the predators closed in, the humans slipped away, regrouped, and struck again. It wasn't long before the predators realized this wasn't the easy victory they had anticipated. The humans were not fighting with desperation, but with purpose. They weren't running, they were testing, learning, adapting with each pass. The tactics the predators had relied on for centuries, the brute force that had crushed civilizations, were being outmaneuvered by a species they had dismissed as weak. Confusion began to set in. How could these humans, with their inferior technology, be holding their own against them? The predators grew irritated. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Their reputation was built on quick, decisive victories. They thrived on fear, on breaking the spirit of their enemies before the battle even truly began. But the humans weren't breaking. They weren't retreating. Worse, they weren't afraid. The humans fought with an eerie composure, never giving the predators the satisfaction of seeing them falter. It was unnerving. For the first time in memory, the predators found themselves in a position they had never experienced: uncertainty. They had always relied on overwhelming their foes with strength and terror, but the humans didn't seem to care about their size or their reputation. The tactics that had worked flawlessly for millennia were being countered by a species that thought differently. A species that didn't fight for dominance or conquest, but for survival. And in the cold, quiet void of space, survival was an instinct humans had perfected. The predators' confidence, once unshakable, began to waver. This small reconnaissance mission, meant to be a quick victory, had turned into something far more troubling. They couldn't comprehend it. These humans, who should have been easy prey, were resisting. They weren't stronger, faster, or better armed, but they were undeniably harder to kill than anything the predators had faced before. And that realization, more than anything, unsettled them. The first encounter between humans and the predators was not the overwhelming victory the aliens had expected. Instead, it was a bitter lesson. A lesson that, for all their power and dominance, they had never truly faced an opponent like humanity. The predators soon realized they weren't facing just another species. Humanity was different, and the key to that difference was their unparalleled adaptability. As the predators intensified their assaults, humans didn't just respond in kind, they escalated in ways the galaxy had never seen. Faced with overwhelming force, humanity didn't rely on brute strength or numbers. They had something else, a weapon no other species had ever wielded so effectively: their ingenuity. At first, the predators dismissed the humans' tactics as desperation. But it wasn't long before they understood the terrifying truth. Humans weren't simply reacting to the predators' aggression, they were strategizing, experimenting, and adapting with frightening speed. Their ships began to behave unpredictably, slipping past predator blockades with stealth systems that used advanced AI to outmaneuver their pursuers. They didn't engage head-on. Instead, they struck when least expected, hitting weak points and vanishing before the predators could respond. But it wasn't just technology. Humanity's greatest asset lay in their mindset. They fought not for conquest, but for survival, and survival on Earth meant enduring a world that was actively trying to kill them every day. Earth had shaped humans into something unique. It wasn't just a death world in name, it was a crucible that forged a species capable of surviving under the most extreme conditions. Every other species in the galaxy saw danger and retreated, humans saw danger and adapted. The predators had never seen anything like it. Their strength had always come from brute force and overwhelming fear, but fear didn't work on humans. They faced enemies 10 times their size, environments that should have crushed them, and yet they stood unyielding. They didn't fight with honor or tradition, they fought with raw, calculated defiance. And when the predators unleashed their full force, believing it would break humanity, they were met with something they couldn't have predicted. In one key battle, deep in contested space, the predators expected a decisive victory. They deployed their largest fleet, confident that the humans would have no choice but to crumble. But the humans didn't wait to be attacked. They took the battle to the predators, using tactics that should never have worked. They exploited the terrain, turning asteroid fields into minefields, using their smaller, faster ships to dart through gaps that the predator warships couldn't navigate. They waged guerrilla warfare, fighting as if every ship, every soldier, was an extension of the planet they came from, hardened by Earth's relentless environment. It wasn't just cunning, it was relentless. Humans fought with a ferocity that defied logic. They didn't rely on sheer power because they didn't need it. They fought smarter, every move calculated, every strike planned to exploit the weaknesses of their enemy. And the predators, creatures who had spent millennia thriving on the weaknesses of others, were now faced with a species that had none of the predictable patterns they relied on. For the first time in their long history, the predators experienced something they never thought possible: doubt. Humanity wasn't just another species to be conquered, they were a threat. Every time the predators adjusted their tactics, the humans shifted, adapted, and struck back with something new. The predators had always seen themselves as the masters of the galaxy, but now they were coming face to face with a force they didn't understand. A species evolved not just to survive, but to thrive under pressure, to bend without breaking, and to turn even the harshest environment into an advantage. The humans' resilience was more than just a strategy, it was who they were. Born of a planet that had tested them at every turn, they had become something more than just a spacefaring race. Earth, the death world, had given rise to a species that couldn't be conquered. And now, the predators, who had never known defeat, were beginning to realize they weren't hunting prey anymore. They were facing equals, if not something far more dangerous. For humanity, it wasn't about winning a single battle or proving their strength. It was about survival. And survival was something they had mastered in ways the predators had never imagined. Each encounter with the humans left the predators more unnerved, more desperate to regain control. But the more they pushed, the stronger the humans seemed to become, as if the challenge only fueled their determination. The galaxy was starting to understand that humans weren't just a minor annoyance. They were a force, a species whose very existence was a testament to the idea that no matter how powerful the predator, there's always something that can fight back. And when that something is humanity, born of a death world, even the mightiest species must face the possibility of defeat. The predators, now fully aware that humanity was no ordinary opponent, decided that enough was enough. They had underestimated humans once, and it had cost them. This time, they would not make the same mistake. Every ship, every soldier, and every resource they could muster was thrown at humanity's strongholds, Earth and its surrounding colonies. This was to be the final strike, an overwhelming force meant to crush humanity once and for all. The predators believed that by bringing their full might to bear, they could reclaim their place as the uncontested rulers of the galaxy. Their fleets darkened the skies of human worlds, and their war machines descended on Earth like locusts, blotting out any hope of survival. But humanity did not flinch. What the predators had not counted on was humanity's uncanny ability to unite under a common threat. Across the globe, humans of every background and belief put aside their differences. There was no division, no hesitation. They understood what was at stake, not just survival, but the right to exist. Nations, once fractured by politics and conflicts, now stood as one. Leaders coordinated strategies across continents. Scientists, engineers, and soldiers worked together, developing new defenses and strategies. Humanity's greatest strength had always been their adaptability, and now, facing the brink of annihilation, they showed just how far they could push it. The final confrontation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The predators brought their most devastating weapons, but humanity met them with something far more powerful: an indomitable will. As the predators rained destruction on Earth, humans struck back with the full force of their ingenuity. They didn't fight the way the predators expected. They exploited their knowledge of their own planet, turning Earth itself into a weapon. The Predators' overwhelming numbers and brute force were countered by a combination of guerrilla warfare, advanced AI defenses, and an intimate understanding of terrain that allowed the humans to wage war on their terms. In space, it was no different. The Predators' armada dwarfed the human fleet, but the humans didn't rely on head-on assaults. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, exploiting the Predators' rigid formations. They deployed decoys and misdirection, using Earth's moons and artificial structures to create ambushes. Psychological warfare played a role as well. Humans broadcasted their victories across Predator frequencies, demoralizing them with every failed assault. The Predators began to realize that no matter how many resources they poured into the fight, humanity wasn't backing down. It all culminated in one decisive battle. The Predators had focused their assault on Earth's largest colony, believing that if they crushed it, humanity's morale would break. But what they encountered was not a cornered prey, but a species that had become something they didn't understand. The humans had fortified the colony, turning its barren landscape into a death trap. As the Predators advanced, they were met with a relentless defense. Human forces didn't just fight, they outthought their opponents. They adapted in real time, using every available resource to turn the tide. As the battle raged on, there was a moment when everything changed. The Predators, for all their might, found themselves being pushed back. It wasn't because humanity had superior technology or greater numbers, but because the humans refused to be broken. Their strategies were unexpected, their tactics relentless. No matter how hard the Predators pushed, the humans pushed harder. And in that moment, for the first time in their long, unchallenged history, the Predators felt something they had never experienced before. Fear. It was subtle at first, a creeping doubt in the back of their minds. But as the battle wore on, as more of their forces were outmaneuvered and destroyed, that doubt turned into something far more profound. The Predators, once so sure of their victory, began to question themselves. They had thrown everything they had at this species, and yet humanity not only survived but thrived under the pressure. The Predators, who had ruled the galaxy through fear and dominance, now found themselves on the receiving end. Their confidence began to crumble. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. For all their advanced weaponry and war machines, the Predators realized that humanity had something they couldn't understand, something they couldn't defeat with brute force alone: resilience. No matter how hard they were hit, the humans kept coming back, stronger, more determined. The Predators, once the hunters, were now the hunted. And as they faced the grim reality of their situation, they understood that this battle wasn't about territory or resources, it was about survival. And humans, forged on a death world, didn't lose when survival was on the line. For the first time, the Predators understood that they might not win. And that realization terrified them. The final blow came swiftly, a culmination of all humanity's efforts and ingenuity. The Predators, battered and bewildered by a species they could no longer comprehend, had thrown everything at their enemies in one last desperate attempt to regain control. But humanity had grown stronger, more cunning, and even more determined. They didn't simply survive the Predators' assault, they turned the war in their favor. What started as a fight for survival had transformed into a battle for dominance, and in this final clash, the Predators faced the full might of human resilience. The decisive strike didn't come from superior firepower or overwhelming numbers. It came from the very thing that had allowed humans to endure in the first place: adaptability. In the heat of battle, as the Predators prepared for what they believed would be their ultimate victory, humans unleashed a final tactic that took the galaxy by surprise. They used the Predators' arrogance and rigidity against them, exploiting the very strengths that had once made them unbeatable. A combination of precise strikes, coordinated sabotage, and psychological warfare broke the Predators' lines, turning their offensive into chaos. One by one, the Predators' warships were dismantled, their forces scattered across the battlefield. They had never encountered a species that fought like this. Humanity didn't rely on sheer strength, they used every tool at their disposal, turning the very environment into a weapon. Earth's colonies, once targets for destruction, became fortresses, rallying points from which humans launched their counterattacks. As the final predator stronghold crumbled, the truth became undeniable: the predators had lost. The galaxy, once ruled by these fearsome beings, was now forced to contend with a new power. The predators, who had spent millennia at the top of the food chain, now retreated in disgrace, licking their wounds and grappling with the knowledge that they had been bested by a species they had once dismissed as insignificant. There would be no more easy victories for them. From now on, they would always carry the memory of their defeat at the hands of humans. The galaxy watched in awe. The same humans that had once been overlooked, seen as fragile creatures from a dangerous, insignificant world, had risen to become something else entirely. They weren't just survivors anymore, they were conquerors. Species that had once feared the predators now looked to humanity with a mixture of respect and fear. The humans had defied every expectation, turning the tide of war and reshaping the balance of power across the galaxy. But humanity didn't seek to rule through fear. Where the predators had conquered with brute force and terror, humans offered alliances and diplomacy. They had proven their strength, yes, but they had also shown the galaxy what true resilience looked like. Species that had been oppressed by the predators now saw humanity as their protectors, a force that could be counted on to stand firm against any threat. The predators, once the undisputed apex, were now just another power in a galaxy that had been irrevocably changed. Humanity's new role in the galaxy was clear. They were no longer just one species among many, they were a force to be reckoned with. The predators had learned this the hard way, and now the rest of the galaxy took notice. Other civilizations began to reach out to humans, seeking alliances, partnerships, and protection. The humans, once dismissed as weak, had become the galaxy's unexpected leaders, tough, adaptable, and unyielding. There was no grand coronation, no moment of declaration. Humanity didn't need one. Their actions had spoken louder than any words could. The galaxy now knew what they were capable of, and the message was clear: humans would not be dominated. They would not be conquered. They would fight, survive, and ultimately, they would thrive. In the aftermath of the war, the predators were forced to acknowledge humanity's place among the stars. Once, they had ruled without challenge, but now they understood that there was no going back to the way things were. Humans weren't just equals, they were something more. A force of nature that could never be tamed. And so, humanity cemented its place in the galaxy. No longer the underdog, no longer the prey. They had proven that even the mightiest predator could fall, and that in the vast expanse of space, the will to survive, the ability to adapt, and the refusal to surrender were the true markers of power. The predators had learned this too late, and the galaxy would never forget. Humans had risen victorious.